but there's still so many unresolved problems with fracking. I think the big issue is groundwater. So, and on the time period, again, I think it's interesting, the draft rule was companies had to comply within 60 days. They now have 2.5 years. So that's
a little bit better for industry, I would assume, right? So let's kind of widen this up just a little bit. We're talking about an ozone layer at ground level, which I think sometimes takes folks back a little bit. They're not quite clear on how this all works and what Laura just described with these emissions. There's stuff that's sort of hanging around that's breathable at that point.
I think I'd actually, I saw that near some natural gas wells, the level of pollution has actually been found to be similar to like the city of Los Angeles in some of these periods in between the drilling and the actual production phase. So yeah, it's a serious off-putting of the gas.
And Alan, what would be some of those things that are emitting? You say the word exene, but for most people, what is exene? Nobody knows what that is, you know?
Boy, I think you're getting a little bit beyond my resume, but I would say that from what I understand, there's nitrous oxide as some of the emittents, and there's I think it's a little bit less important about the type that's coming out, and more of just simply the impact that it's low layer. You have, as was said, it's at the same level as say at Los Angeles in terms of smog level, but it's important to also note that it's seen and unseen. There's some stuff that, in particular, what we're hearing, for the transition over the San Juan discussion, it's a bit about a cleanup of not just what is seen in terms of smog, but it's also the different pollutants that are out there that aren't seen that also are extremely damaging and something that has to be considered.
While clearly the industry has taken note of this, and what you started to mention a little bit earlier, I want to come back to that there is actually somewhat of a marketplace fix for this. Meaning what Laura described, let's take methane gas, for example, the emission of methane gas. You have a market for that, for capturing this stuff and actually selling it in a different market. Is that going to be part of the solution here, a market solution?
Well, methane is the main component in natural gas, and there are other slightly heavier hydrocarbons that when you turn on your gas stove at home, you'll be burning. But it is the main component. And one of the things that is currently done when we're not using Green Complete is it's in a lot of cases it isn't even flared, which is a burning. It's just vented. And so the new regulations encourage and have regulations to capture. And to the extent that we can capture and that it's of a quality that can be put into the processing systems and sold, that's the best all the way around. In some cases, you may not be able to capture all of it because there's very strict requirements for the gas has to be proven worthy to be put into the gathering and other systems. And there may be a time where it needs to be flared, but the regulations, as I understand them, allow for flaring as opposed to venting as being better. Now, having said that, it's going to be more visible as well, and that's that seen and unseen. And that's one of those things, if you see a gas flare, which is just basically a large pipe that has a flame on the top of it, it's a lot more noticeable. And so I think that's the sort of thing that definitely will put public pressure on the industry. That's one of the things that is talked about a lot today, and there are perfectly good reasons to flare gas, but it's very visible, where if it's vented, it's not.
Laura, let's shift over to another air topic, and that is, bigger coal-fired plants, big places, and we have another ruling where, again, there's some time for the industry to again take a bet on some technology that's going to come along to get to now a level that the EPA has said, gas producers can meet, but unfortunately coal producers cannot meet at this time. Where does this sit for you when you're reporting? Are we going to be able to get there in New Mexico with this?
Well, I think it's interesting that EPA's draft rule that they just released would apply to, it would not apply to existing coal-fired power plants or any coal-fired power plants that are in the proposal stage right now. And it would require them to limit their reductions to 1,000 pounds of carbon per megawatt hour. And so I think it's interesting. I think it's a great move on the administration to finally be talking about this in a serious way. But I also think, there's been some criticism, like it's attacking the coal industry, but coal hasn't been a viable new power source for a long time. They tried to build Desert Rock power plant. There wasn't a market for that. Electricity just this week, California announced that it was selling their share in the Four Corners generating station. There isn't a huge market for coal.
Interesting. Would you agree with that coal has played its hand, so to speak, and that we need to be more aggressive towards something else? Or is this a good middle ground on something that we're used to getting out of the ground? We know how to do this. We know how to make it work. Is this a reasonable compromise for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that this is a really big win for the state, because if you think about it, what this does is it provides strong incentives to move towards natural gas, which is a real positive to the state, especially in terms of revenue. But secondarily, in terms of for renewables, I mean, we're number 2 in terms of solar potential, number 7 in terms of wind potential, and then 13th for geothermal. This is a huge opportunity for our state, and this is where the job creation is going to come around. This is, and so it's a transition that's needed to happen, and it's a transition that really, in the bottom line, is going to create a lot of jobs for our state and new revenues over time.
Let me stop you right there, because that's always the pitch we hear from folks who are looking for new energy sources. And is it just a lock that this will happen if, in fact, coal becomes diminished either through regulation or use? Is that an absolute lock that we're going to have that fill in with new energy, or does something else need to happen to get this going?
That's a great point. I'd say it's something where it just requires some leadership around the issue. It's one of the things, we actually have really good legislation in place to support renewable energy in that transition. But we have had, it's one of those things where if you're not running, you're not keeping up. If you look at Colorado, you look at California, look at Arizona, they're all very aggressively going after renewable energy. And so when we're, courting these companies that come and locate here or expand operations here, but they're also being courted by other states, it puts us at a very strategic disadvantage if we're not all united, one voice, aggressively going after them. From our viewpoint, it's like we need a diverse energy portfolio. Renewable energy is an obvious next step.
Sidsel, regard the EPA ruling that Laura just mentioned, I want to touch a little bit on those standards. Now, and I'll talk to Wally about this too. Gas can meet those standards, as I mentioned, but it's almost kind of an odd thing because some folks feel we have a little bit of a gas bubble going on right now, and that may not be the long-term answer. Is this fair to the coal folks to be able to meet this, to maybe chase something that's a bit of a marketplace bubble? Can they actually do this and still make $1 in your view, and still be clean in your view?
I'm not sure if this is answering the question, but honestly, I'm not sure that this EPA ruling actually changes much for New Mexico. It's a good incentive to move towards clean energy, but there were no new coal plants planned anyway. So it's moving us sort of philosophically, I think, in a new direction, which is always helpful and beneficial, but in terms of putting the brakes on anything that was in the works, it doesn't really do that. But I wanted to just talk about something Alan had mentioned about sort of going to this idea of leadership and when it comes to renewables, and that's always the argument on the side of industry, is that it doesn't make sense for a state to be a leader when you're talking about clean energy, because especially, or with emissions in particular, because it's something that really needs to be addressed on a national or even global level. So that's a debate I always find really fascinating in these things. Is I've done a lot of reporting about the youth movement when it comes to emissions levels, and there's this real passion there, this real desire to be part of something wonderful and the next big thing, and they're not going to let somebody tell them that it doesn't pay to be a leader. But it's a good argument too, is that why would we potentially want to put ourselves economically at risk when nobody around us is really going there?
Gotcha. Got a hold on that one. In a moment, 2 leaders of major state agencies assess the future of environmental policy here in New Mexico.
I was just talking to somebody yesterday who said he thought that humans living in a house with plumbing could actually get by on 16 gallons a day.
Environmental